They said she was cursed for not speaking, but I sat beside her until she whispered thank you. The first time I saw her, she was standing in the doorway of Mackenzie's general store like a shadow that had forgotten how to move. Dust swirled around her bare feet, and her dark hair hung in tangled curtains that hid most of her face. The townspeople of Bitter Creek gave her a wide berth crossing to the other side of Main Street rather than walk too close. Some made the sign of the cross, others just spat in the dirt and muttered under their breath. "That's the curse girl," old Pete whispered to me as we sat on the porch of the Silver Dollar Saloon. "Been here near 3 months now, and ain't spoke a single word to nobody. Doc Hartwell says she's got the devil's tongue or maybe no tongue at all." I took a long swig of my whiskey and watched her through the amber liquid. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17 years old. Her dress was patched and faded, the kind you'd see on someone who'd traveled far and hard. But there was something in the way she held herself straight back despite the obvious hunger in her thin frame that spoke of dignity. "Where'd she come from?" I asked. Pete shrugged. "Nobody knows for certain. Some say she wandered in from the desert. Others reckon she escaped from some terrible place. The preacher thinks she's been struck dumb by God himself for some sin she won't confess. And what do you think?" The old-timer scratched his grizzled beard. "I think she's just a scared girl who's seen too much of the world's ugliness." I found myself nodding. In my 43 years I'd seen enough scared people to recognize the signs. The way she flinched when someone moved too quickly near her. How she kept to the shadows and never turned her back completely to the street. This wasn't the behavior of someone cursed. This was someone who'd learned not to trust. "My name is Samuel Cooper and I'd come to Bitter Creek to forget. The war had taken too much from me, my wife, my home, and most of my faith in humanity. I drifted west like so many other broken men, looking for a place where the past couldn't follow. Bitter Creek was the kind of town that asked no questions about yesterday, which suited me fine. But something about that silent girl bothered me. Maybe it was the way the children threw pebbles at her when she passed, or how the shopkeepers refused to serve her unless she could pay in advance. Maybe it was simply that I recognized a fellow soul adrift in an unfriendly world. The next morning I was nursing coffee and trying to ignore the pounding in my skull when I saw her again. She was sitting on the steps of the abandoned church at the end of town watching the sunrise paint the mountains purple and gold. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, and she rocked slightly like someone trying to comfort herself. I found myself walking toward her before I'd made a conscious decision to do so. My boots crunched on the gravel and she turned at the sound. Up close I could see her eyes, the palest blue like winter sky. They were old eyes in a young face full of weariness and pain. "Morning," I said, settling down on the step beside her, careful to leave plenty of space between us. She didn't respond, just watched me with those wary eyes. "Beautiful sunrise," I continued, looking out at the vista she'd been studying. "Reminds me of home." Still nothing. But she didn't get up and leave, which I took as a good sign. I sat with her until the sun cleared the mountains and the town began to stir. Then I stood, tipped my hat politely and walked away. I didn't look back, but I felt her watching me go. This became our routine. Every morning I'd find her on those church steps and I'd sit beside her. Sometimes I'd talk about the weather or the view or some memory from my past. Other times we'd just sit in comfortable silence. She never spoke, but gradually she began to relax around me. The rigid tension in her shoulders eased, and once or twice I caught her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. The townspeople thought I'd lost my mind. "You're wasting your time, Cooper," warned Sheriff Morrison. "That girl's touched in the head. Ain't natural for someone to go that long without speaking." "Maybe she just doesn't have anything to say to you," I replied. The sheriff's face darkened. "You'd do well to mind your own business. There's talk that she brings bad luck. Crops have been failing and Mrs. Henderson's prize cow up and died last week for no reason at all." I almost laughed. "You really think a half-starved girl is responsible for drought and livestock disease?" "I think strange things have been happening since she arrived. That afternoon I bought 2 apples from Mackenzie's store and brought them to our usual spot. The girl was there as always, but today she looked different. Her face was pale and there was a purple bruise on her left cheek that hadn't been there that morning." I held out one of the apples. For a moment she just stared at it. Then slowly she reached out and took it. Her fingers were thin and pale and they trembled slightly. "Someone hurt you," I said, not quite a question. She bit into the apple and looked away. "I was a soldier," I told her. "Saw a lot of good people hurt by those who should have protected them. It's not right, and it's not your fault." Something shifted in her expression. She looked at me directly for the first time and I saw tears gathering in those pale eyes. "I know you can't or won't speak," I said gently. "That's all right. Sometimes silence is the only safe place we have." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't look away. I learned the truth about the bruise from Maria, the Mexican woman who ran the boarding house. She'd seen Jimmy Morton and his friends cornering the girl behind the grain store, calling her a witch and demanding she prove she wasn't cursed by speaking. "They would have done worse," Maria whispered. But old Mackenzie came out with his shotgun. That evening I found Jimmy Morton drinking at the Silver Dollar. He was a big man, the kind who'd grown up using his fist to solve problems he was too stupid to think through. His knuckles were scuffed and he wore a self-satisfied smirk that made my hands itch for my pistol. "Heard you had some trouble with a young lady today," I said, sliding onto the stool beside him. Jimmy's smirk widened. "Ain't no lady, just a crazy mute who's hexing our town." "Funny thing about hexes," I said conversationally. "In my experience, the only real curse around here is men who think it's acceptable to hit children." The smirk faded. "You calling me out, Cooper? I'm suggesting you find a new hobby, one that doesn't involve young women." Jimmy stood up, all bluster and beer courage. He was bigger than me, but I'd been fighting since I was 12 years old, and I'd learned that size didn't mean much when it came to real violence. "Or what?" he snarled. I stood too, slowly, letting my coat fall open so he could see the Colt at my hip. "Or you'll find out what an actual curse looks like." The saloon had gone quiet. Jimmy looked around, perhaps hoping for support, but the other patrons suddenly found their drinks very interesting. After a long moment he sat back down. "This ain't over," he muttered. "Yes it is," I said, and I meant it. The next morning, I found the girl waiting for me as usual, but she wasn't alone. A small tabby kitten was curled in her lap, purring loudly as she stroked its fur. She looked up when she heard my boots on the gravel, and for the first time since I'd known her, she almost smiled. "Made a friend, I see," I said, settling down beside her. She nodded. Just a small movement, but it was the first time she'd responded to anything I'd said. "Cats are good judges of character," I continued. "They don't waste time on people who aren't worth knowing." The almost smile grew a little stronger. We sat together, the three of us, watching the town wake up. I told her about my own cat, a cranky old Tom named Beauregard who'd followed me home from the battlefield, and proceeded to rule my life for the next 8 years. She listened, still petting the kitten, and I thought I saw her shoulders shake slightly, maybe with silent laughter. "You know," I said after a while, "I never did catch your name." She looked at me for a long moment, then raised one finger and traced letters in the dust. "A-N. You don't need to thank me for treating you like a human being, Anna. That should be the bare minimum." Over the following weeks, our morning conversations became the best part of my day. Anna never spoke aloud, but she began to communicate in other ways. She'd nod or shake her head in response to questions. She'd trace words in the dirt when she wanted to tell me something. Once, when I was telling her about a particularly ridiculous poker game, she covered her mouth with her hand and her shoulders shook with silent laughter. The kitten, who she'd named Whiskers, became our constant companion. He seemed to understand that Anna needed protection, and he'd hiss at anyone who came too close with threatening intentions. The townspeople started calling him her familiar, adding fuel to their superstitious fear. I didn't care what they thought. For the first time since the war, I had something to look forward to each day. Anna brought a peace to my soul that I'd thought lost forever. Her silence wasn't empty, it was full of observation, understanding, and a kind of gentle wisdom that spoke louder than any words. But peace never lasted long in places like Bitter Creek. It was a Tuesday when everything went wrong. I arrived at our usual meeting spot to find Anna huddled against the church door, Whiskers cradled protectively in her arms. Her dress was torn, and there was dirt in her hair as if she'd been dragged. Her pale eyes were wide with terror. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She pointed toward town with a shaking hand, then traced frantically in the dirt, "THEYSAID, My blood ran cold. "Killed who?" "MRMORTON. Jimmy Morton, I closed my eyes trying to think. Anna, where were you last night? She pointed to the church, then to the small lean-to shelter behind it where she'd been sleeping since arriving in town. All night? She nodded vigorously. Can anyone vouch for that? Her face crumpled and she shook her head. Of course not. The whole town avoided her. I could hear voices in the distance growing louder. An angry crowd was forming in the town square and they were headed our way. Listen to me, I said urgently. I'm going to get you out of here. But first I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Take Whiskers and go to the old mining claim up in the hills, you know, the one I showed you last week. Hide there until I come for you. She shook her head frantically, pointing at me, then at the approaching crowd. I'll be fine, I lied. But you won't be if they find you. Go. Now. For a moment I thought she might refuse. Then she leaned forward and pressed something into my hand. A small wooden cross worn smooth by years of handling. Before I could react, she was gone, slipping around the back of the church with Whiskers in her arms. I looked down at the cross in my palm. It was old, carved with care, and on the back were the initials A.M. Anna Morton. Morton. She shared a name with the dead man. The crowd reached me just as I slipped the cross into my pocket. Sheriff Morrison led them, his face grim, followed by 20 or so townspeople carrying torches and rope. My stomach dropped when I saw the rope. Where is she, Cooper? Morrison demanded. Where's who? Don't play dumb. The witch. The curse girl. Jimmy Morton's been found dead, and she's the only one in this town with reason to kill him. What makes you think she killed anyone? What makes you think she killed anyone? Dr. Hartwell stepped forward, his medical bag clutched in his hands. Jimmy was found this morning behind the grain store. Throat cut. Neat as you please. No sign of struggle. No blood trail. It's not natural. Sounds like he was caught by surprise, I said. Could have been anyone. Could have been, agreed Morrison. But it wasn't. We found this near the body. He held up a piece of faded fabric that looked like it had been torn from Anna's dress. My heart sank, but I kept my expression neutral. That doesn't prove anything. It proves enough, snarled Bill Hutchins, Jimmy's drinking buddy. She cursed him, just like she's cursed this whole town. We should have run her out weeks ago. Or strung her up, added another voice from the crowd. I stepped forward, my hand resting casually on my gun. Now that's interesting. See, I was under the impression that in civilized places, we had trials before we started hanging people. This ain't about civilization, Morrison said. This is about protecting our town from evil. The only evil I see here is a bunch of grown men planning to murder a girl without a shred of real evidence. The crowd murmured angrily, but I noticed several people shifting uncomfortably. Not everyone was comfortable with mob justice. Stand aside, Cooper, Morrison warned. We know you've been keeping company with her, but that doesn't make you party to her crimes, and if I don't, the sheriff's hand moved to his own weapon, then you'll be arrested for interfering with the law. I almost laughed. The law? Morrison, the only law you're following right now is the law of the lynch mob. For a tense moment we stared at each other. The crowd was getting restless, and I could see some of them fingering their weapons. I was outnumbered 20-1, and while I might take a few of them with me, the math wasn't in my favor. Then salvation came from an unexpected source. Wait, called a voice from the back of the crowd. Maria pushed through, her face set with determination. Before you do something you cannot undo, you should hear what I have to say. Morrison frowned. This ain't your business, Maria. Murder is everyone's business. She replied firmly, and I know who killed Jimmy Morton. The crowd fell silent. Last night I could not sleep, so I sat by my window with my sewing. At 2 in the morning I saw someone leaving the grain store. It was not the girl. Who was it? Morrison demanded. Maria's eyes swept the crowd before settling on a figure near the back. It was Tom Bradley. Tom Bradley, the grain store owner. He was a thin, nervous man who'd always struck me as the type to hold grudges. The crowd turned to look at him, and I saw panic flash across his face. That's not true, he stammered. I was home all night. Ask my wife. Your wife was visiting her sister in Tucson, Maria said calmly. She left yesterday morning and won't be back until Friday. Bradley's face went white. You're lying. You're covering for that witch. The only person I am covering for is the truth, Maria replied. Jimmy Morton has been stealing from your store for months. I have seen him slipping through the back door after dark, filling his pockets with supplies. You finally caught him last night, didn't you, Tom? The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Bradley broke. He was a thief, he shouted. A drunk and a thief. He was bleeding me dry. And when I confronted him, he laughed at me, said I was too much of a coward to stop him. So you cut his throat, Morrison finished quietly. Bradley slumped, all the fight going out of him. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I just wanted him to stop stealing from me. And you planted that piece of fabric to frame the girl, I added. He nodded miserably. Nobody would have missed her. She's not even really one of us. The crowd was murmuring now, but the anger had shifted. They were looking at Bradley with disgust, and at themselves with something that might have been shame. Tom Bradley, Sheriff Morrison said formally, you're under arrest for the murder of Jimmy Morton. As Morrison led Bradley away, the crowd began to disperse. Some of the townspeople looked my way, perhaps wondering if they should apologize, but most just slunk off into the shadows. Dr. Hartwell paused beside me. The girl, he said quietly. Where is she? Safe, I replied. He nodded. Good. We were wrong about her, about a lot of things. After the crowd had gone, I sat on the church steps and pulled out Anna's wooden cross. The initials on the back told a story I was only beginning to understand. A.M. Anna Morton. Was Jimmy Morton her brother, her father, someone else entirely who shared the name? I was still pondering this when I heard soft footsteps on the gravel. Anna appeared around the side of the church, whiskers cradled in her arms. Her pale eyes searched my face anxiously. It's over, I told her. Tom Bradley confessed. You're safe. Relief flooded her features, and she sank down beside me. For a long moment we sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Then so quietly I almost missed it, she spoke. Thank you. Her voice was soft and rusty from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I turned to look at her, hardly daring to believe what I'd heard. She was watching me with those pale blue eyes, and for the first time since I'd known her, they held no fear. Anna, I said gently, you spoke. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was my uncle, she whispered. Jimmy Morton. He hurt me, for years. When I finally escaped, I swore I'd never speak again. Speaking had only ever brought me pain. My heart broke for her. And now I know that silence isn't always safety, she said, her voice growing slightly stronger, and that some people are worth trusting with your voice. I felt tears prick my own eyes. Anna, I want to try, she continued, to speak again, to trust again. Will you help me? Of course, I said, for as long as you need. She smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed her entire face. I'd been wanting to ask you something for weeks. What's that? Would you like to have dinner with Whiskers and me? I make a decent rabbit stew. I laughed, the sound echoing off the old church walls. I'd be honored. As we sat there in the morning sun, Anna tentatively trying out her voice and Whiskers purring contentedly between us, I realized that sometimes the best conversations happen in silence, and sometimes, all it takes to break a curse is one person willing to sit beside you until you find your voice again. The townspeople of Bitter Creek learned to see Anna differently after that day. Her voice, when she chose to use it, was gentle and warm. She became the town's unofficial counselor, the person people came to when they needed someone to listen, really listen to their troubles. And me, I found my own voice again too, in those quiet morning conversations, with a girl who taught me that healing doesn't always require words, but it always requires presence. We stayed in Bitter Creek, Anna and I, building a life together that neither of us had dared to imagine. Some folks said it was unusual, a bachelor in his 40s and a young woman barely out of girlhood, becoming family, but we didn't care what they said. We'd learned that the real curse wasn't silence, it was the refusal to see the humanity in others. Every morning, we still sit on those church steps, watching the sunrise paint the mountains. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. Whiskers, now grown fat and lazy, supervises our conversations with the wisdom of a creature who's always known that love comes in many forms. And Anna, she speaks when she has something to say, and keeps silent when she doesn't. Both are her choice now, and that makes all the difference. They said she was cursed for not speaking, but I knew the truth. She was blessed with the wisdom to know when words were worth the risk, and when she finally whispered thank you, it wasn't just for saving her life, it was for giving her back her choice. That's worth more than all the words in the world.